Tales Under a Broken Sky, Episode 25, A Tale by the Hearth. The Banshee. So, you wanted to hear about the family Banshee, did you? Well, I'm no expert in folk tales or the supernatural. You'd have to talk to Sean Daly or old Maggie for that sort of thing. Or Tom O'Riordan, but he passed last year, God rest his soul. He was a fine storyteller, and we spent many a night down at Jimmy Brick's sitting around the hearth in the back room, listening to him spin a yarn. But I'd say that's not what you're after, is it? No. I suspect you want to know about our Banshee, and what I've seen with my own two eyes. Well, settle in. I'm prone to rambling in my old age. I was just a lad, about the same age as you when I saw her. My granda, God rest his soul, was poorly. I heard it was his liver, but the adults never told us young people any of that kind of thing. And afterwards, nobody ever talked about it. Just said it was a shame. He was too young, even though he was older than I am now by a few years. And I can tell you, these knees of mine aren't the same, lad. Not anymore. But my granda, he was as lively as they come, right up to the day he came down with that illness. I was just old enough to know something was wrong. I heard that he'd sold off a small herd of sheep, and some land. Those little bastards were his pride and joy, except maybe every now and then one of them lambs would disappear, and the large chest freezer in the shed would be a little fuller. He made no money off them, mind you, but he poured every ounce of what love he didn't have for my granny and the rest of his family into minding them. I was never one for them myself, smelly things, and I couldn't stand plodding around behind him up the mountain. But I was sad to hear about the land. That was our thing, my granda and I, trekking along the rocky paths, spreading fertilizer on his fields and chasing after those smelly buggers. And Jackie too. I almost forgot about her, God bless her. Most loyal sheepdog I'd ever seen. Some cross between a collie and God knows what, with two mismatched eyes. She'd sit in my lap in the car on the way home, rain or shine, and I'd smell a wet dog for days. But I loved that little lass. She died just before Granda passed, and I can tell you, I never cried as much as the day they laid her to rest in the back garden of the old home, right next to the old willow. It was the first time I'd seen death, at least in my young head that I could remember, and it wasn't the last time that year either. But I swear, I saw the reality of death more at her small burial than I did when my granda died 6 months later. I'm sure you can excuse an old fella for wandering off down memory lane for a moment. You wanted to know about the Banshee, and here you are listening to me ramble on about sheep and old dogs. Right then, so it was a few days before he passed, my granda, that is. It was late in the evening and I was on my way back from a game of football with the lads. Back in those days, a young fella my age could wander the town on his own for hours, and no one would think twice. Not like things are now at all. I was passing by the old mill, just around the corner from the old home place, when I saw her, standing by the railing, a tall slim woman dressed in white. Her hair dark as the water in the old mill stream below. Only a young fella, I thought nothing of it, other than she must have been cold. I was bundled up in my warmest coat, but she was standing there in nothing but the flimsiest of dresses, and when I got closer I saw that even her feet were bare. Being a young lad, I was as awkward as I was foolish, and when I heard her muffled sobs I crossed the road and hurried home to tell my dad. When I told my parents what I'd seen, my father hurried to check in case the young woman was in some sort of trouble. But when he got back home, he told me there was no one there. It had been just a scant few minutes between my seeing her and my father returning home. But what was I to know? I was young. I thought nothing more of that strange woman and her silent weeping. But later, as I lay in bed half dozing, I was woken by a piercing wail. Now when I tell you there's nothing like it, it doesn't do that anguish cry justice. It broke my heart to hear it, and brought tears to my eyes. When I went to my window, she was there, her dress like moonlight and her hair the deepest shadow. She was there, and then she wasn't, and the phone rang with the news. My granda was dead. We weren't allowed inside the funeral home. No place for children, we were told. A family friend minded us outside while the people paraded past to pay their last respects. I thought I saw her again, standing in the cold November air watching. But when I turned to get my minder's attention, she was gone. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. You might think I'm being hard on myself, but I know this for a fact. When I saw her a second time a decade later, the night before my father passed, no one believed me either. By then I was a full-grown man, still a young one mind you, but old enough to know the difference between what I saw and the imaginings of a child. My dad wasn't ill, just a sudden heart attack, they said. I was old enough then to be told something resembling the truth. It was quick and unexpected, but it wasn't for me. I was away at the time, work up in the city. I used to live an hour's walk or so from the centre, and would walk home when my shift finished. My first car was still just a boyish dream then. It was one of those dark December evenings, just before the turn of the year. You know the type I'm talking about. The wind was high, the clouds low to the ground, and the threat of rain, more a promise soon to be fulfilled. Along the road home, there was a low bridge over the canal. On clearer nights, I often stopped there for a smoke, to break the long miles before bed. I always wondered where it would take me if I was to go down them steps and walk the narrow path that followed the sluggish current. My life in the city wasn't bad, mind you, but it wasn't home. Part of me yearned for the freedom of the countryside again, so I used to stand there and think of the mountains and fields. Now, the night in question wasn't one such night, but something made me stop anyway. It was like the mountain wind I remember from my youth. Have you ever felt that? It presses against your back, but it feels like you're being pulled along. That's what it felt like as I leant over that wall and struck a match. And there she was, kneeling by the waterside, her face cupped in her hands and her sobs floating through the wind like driftwood on the gentle waves of the bay. I turned as a car passed behind me, and when I looked back she was gone. Lying awake until dawn, I couldn't get the sight of her to leave my head. The memory of her haunted me, it did, until the winter sun finally broke the twilight, accompanied by her distant wail. My mother called to tell me the news not 5 minutes later. Now, bear in mind, these aren't the only times I've seen her, lad. She cried for my mother too, God rest her soul, and your Uncle Sean, and a few of your cousins that died when you were still too young to remember. It was always the same anguish wail that let me know, before anyone ever picked up a phone. And as you're asking, I might as well tell you. I've seen her one more time. Late last night, standing out there in the garden by the old apple tree, pale and beautiful as a vision. I'm afraid to say this time, lad, her tears were shed for me. Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to episode 25 of Tales Under a Broken Sky. I've decided to do something a little bit different this week. This concept is something I've been playing around with in the back of my mind for a while. I've been doing a lot of short-form fiction recently. Obviously, for the podcast, I have those short stories that are in and around kind of 30 minutes. They're about 3,000 to 4,000 words long. But a lot of my other writing that I've been doing has been quite a bit smaller, actually, floating around the 1,000-word mark. Now, it makes for a much shorter episode, but I kind of like the idea of having something scaled back, kind of sitting around the fire telling stories or recounting a spooky tale, kind of reminiscent of Are You Afraid of the Dark when I was a child. So this is the first one of these that I've put together, just a short little tale about an old man recounting the times he's seen the family Banshee to his grandchildren while sitting around the fire. This one was quite a bit of fun to write. I really like writing in a more casual tone rather than, I suppose, the more formal tone that I tend to use with a lot more of my prose. The language was a lot looser, it was a lot more casual. I kind of got to play around with the accent, a couple kind of idiomatic ways of saying things, you know, different pronunciations of words and stuff like that that I would have been familiar with from my youth. So it was a lot more interesting for me to kind of mess around with that from that casual point of view and kind of explore different ways of putting together dialogue, building up a character, and making something come to life kind of in a lot fewer words and with very, very little production in the background. It was an interesting experiment, and I actually have a few more of these kind of planned in the coming months. Just as the short stories that would probably never make it onto the show if I was kind of to stick with the half-hour episode style format. And as I've been doing a lot more writing over the past year, I've started producing a lot more of these kind of little snippets that aren't full stories in the short story sense. They're probably more akin to flash fiction than anything else, but I still think it's kind of fun to put them together, narrate them, and see where it takes me. So I had a lot of fun doing this. I have plans for a few more in the coming months as well. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and we'll catch you for the next one. Until next time. Thank you for listening to episode 25 of Tales Under a Broken Sky. I hope you enjoyed this week's production as much as I enjoyed writing and recording it. If you did enjoy it, please consider liking and subscribing on your platform of choice, and even sharing with your friends. This will really help the show and keep me motivated to produce more content. Thank you again for your time. Until next time.